She didn't know his name. She didn't know the black Maserati she threw herself into belonged to the most dangerous man in Boston. She only knew that Liam and Noah, her blood, the two men who had raised her after their parents died, had just sold her in marriage to Michael Hayes for a debt they couldn't pay, and she would rather take her chances with a stranger than walk back into that church. Olivia Fisher had run 2 blocks in white satin heels before she saw it, parked in the shadow of the restaurant on the corner, engine idling, the door slightly ajar like the universe itself was giving her one way out. She dove in, pulled the door shut, pressed herself into the corner of the back seat and tried to disappear. That's when she felt it. Cold air, expensive cologne. The leather was so soft it felt illegal. She wasn't alone. She looked up slowly, dark eyes, sharp jaw. He sat perfectly still, one arm resting across the back of the seat, watching her the way a man watches something unexpected but not unwelcome, not surprised, not angry, just waiting. Then the banging started, Noah's fist against the window, hard. "Olivia," Liam's voice came through the glass, low and tight. "Get out of the car, now." Behind them, Michael Hayes stood on the sidewalk, straightening his cufflinks like she was a minor inconvenience he'd already solved. She waited for the man beside her to open the door and hand her over. He didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward, just slightly, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When he spoke, his accent was thick and quiet, and absolutely certain. "They will not touch you." He reached past her and locked the door. "You have my word." He tapped the partition once. The Maserati pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent, sliding past Liam's furious face, past Noah's shock, past Michael Hayes standing frozen on the sidewalk. As the Boston skyline swallowed the street behind them, Olivia pressed her back against the seat and tried to slow her heartbeat. She hoped she hadn't just escaped one dangerous man by hiding with another. If you're ready for stories where black women stop shrinking and start ruling, where the men who try to own them lose everything, and where love finds you in the last place you expected, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. This community is built for women who know their worth and for those still finding it. Like, share, hit the notification bell. Welcome to the family. Now let's get into it. Chapter 1. The church was 4 blocks away. Olivia knew because she had counted them that morning, standing at the bedroom window of the hotel suite Liam had booked. Not for her comfort, but because a bride arriving from a nice address looked better for the photographs. She had stood there in her robe, coffee going cold in her hand, counting those 4 blocks and thinking about how short a distance it was between the life she had and the one they were selling her into. She hadn't planned to run. There was no bag packed, no money hidden, no friend waiting with a car on the corner. All she had was the moment. A flower girl dropping her basket, petals scattering across the stone steps, Liam bending to help her, Noah turning to say something to the driver. 2 seconds when nobody was watching, Olivia picked up her dress and ran. The heels were a mistake. White satin, narrow at the heel, built for standing at an altar, not sprinting down a Boston sidewalk. She lost one before she reached the first corner and kicked the other off without stopping. The pavement was cold through her stockings. She didn't care. She ran past a coffee shop, past a man walking a dog who stopped and stared, past a woman who said, "Oh, honey," as she blurred by. Behind her, she heard Noah first. Olivia, stop." Then Liam, sharper. "Don't you dare." She ran harder, her dress pulled tight across her hips with every stride, the fabric not built for a woman her size moving this fast, and she grabbed a fistful of it at her thigh and hiked it up so she could breathe and move and keep going. Her lungs burned. Her legs were strong though, always had been, and she used every bit of that now. She turned onto a street without thinking, a narrow block she didn't know, lined with old brownstones and a restaurant on the corner. And there it was. A black Maserati sitting at the curb, engine running, rear door not fully closed, like someone had stepped out in a hurry and hadn't pulled it shut behind them. Olivia didn't think. She pulled the door open, threw herself in, and yanked it closed. The interior was dark and cold and smelled like leather and something else. Cedar, maybe. Clean and expensive. She pressed herself into the far corner, bunching her dress around her, trying to make herself small. Her breath was ragged. Her feet were bleeding slightly where the pavement had cut through her stockings. She could hear her own heartbeat. Then she heard something else. Breathing. Slow and even. Not hers. She turned her head. He was sitting on the other side of the back seat, watching her. Not startled, not reaching for his phone to call someone, just watching, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from being calm. It came from being the kind of man who was never caught off guard because the world simply didn't surprise him anymore. Early 30s, dark hair pushed back, sharp jaw, short beard, a suit that was charcoal grey and fitted him like it was made just for him. His eyes were dark and direct and giving absolutely nothing away. He looked at her the way most men never had. Not at the wedding dress, not at her curves filling it out, not at the mascara tracking down her face. He looked at her eyes, like whatever was happening behind them was the only thing worth paying attention to. Olivia opened her mouth. The banging started before she could speak. Noah's palm flat against the window. Then Liam's face appeared at the glass, jaw tight, the smile he'd been wearing for the guests completely gone. Olivia, stop this nonsense this instant. His voice came through muffled but clear. Open the door. She didn't move. Behind him, she could see Michael Hayes standing on the sidewalk. He wasn't banging on windows. He was just standing there with his hands in his pockets, watching the scene with the mild irritation of a man whose food order had come out wrong. That expression, that complete absence of panic, told her everything. He wasn't worried. He thought this was already resolved. The man beside her hadn't moved either. He was looking at her brothers through the window with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not angry, not inconvenienced, interested, maybe, the way a chess player looks at the board when the other side makes an unexpected move. Is that your family? He asked. His accent was Italian, thick at the edges, unhurried. Unfortunately, Olivia said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. You see the man behind them? She asked. That's Michael Hayes. She swallowed. The man they want me to get married to. A beat of silence. He looked at Hayes for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, quick and dark and gone before she could name it. Then he looked back at her, and whatever that was had been put away somewhere she couldn't see. What's your name? Olivia. He nodded slowly like she'd confirmed something. Something in his expression changed. Then he leaned forward and pressed the intercom on the partition. Don't move the car yet. He opened his door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Olivia pressed forward to watch through the window. He stood between her brothers and the car, one hand in his pocket, completely relaxed. He was taller than Liam, which Olivia noted, because Liam had spent their entire childhood using his height to make her feel small. Gentlemen, she's not getting out, he said. Simple. No raised voice. Liam stepped forward. This is a family matter. It doesn't concern you. She's staying in my car. He looked at Liam. The way you look at something that has made a noise you don't find particularly interesting, and you're going to step back. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Noah said. The man looked at Noah. Then he turned to Michael Hayes. Something passed between them in that look. Something Olivia couldn't read from inside the car. Recognition, history. Hayes's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. The man turned, got back in the car, and pulled the door shut. "Partition up," he said. The glass rose. The Maserati pulled away from the curb. Olivia exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. "Excuse me, mister, you still haven't told me your name," she said. He looked at her. Antonio Valenti. She didn't know the name. Not yet, but something in the way he said it, like it was both an introduction and a warning, told her she was about to find out exactly who she'd just placed her life beside. Chapter 2. The penthouse was on the 34th floor of a building that didn't have its name on the outside. That was the first thing Olivia noticed. No branding, no gold lettering, nothing announcing itself to the street below. Just glass and steel, and the quiet confidence of something that didn't need to explain what it was. The second thing she noticed was that Antonio hadn't said a single word during the 20-minute drive. Not cold, not hostile. Just contained, like a man who understood that silence was its own kind of language, and he was fluent in it. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. Marble floors, high ceilings, massive windows overlooking the Boston skyline, a kitchen that had clearly never seen a takeout container, bookshelves that covered an entire wall, not for decoration, actually read, spines creased, some with pages folded over. Olivia stood in the middle of it in her torn wedding dress and bleeding feet, and tried to remember the last time she'd been somewhere that felt this still. "Sit," Antonio said, not unkindly. He nodded toward the couch. "I'm fine standing." He looked at her feet. She looked at her feet. A small red stain was spreading through her left stocking where the pavement had caught her. She sat. He disappeared down the hallway and came back 2 minutes later, with a first aid kit, a glass of water, and a grey t-shirt and sweatpants folded over his arm. He set everything on the coffee table without comment and pointed to a room. She understood privacy without having to ask for it. She went in the room and changed quickly. She cleaned her feet, drank half the water, and went back out. One of the books on his shelf caught her eye. Advanced Systems Architecture, dog-eared at the spine, a pen still tucked between the pages like he'd put it down mid-chapter. She hadn't met many people who read that book for pleasure. In the morning light coming through the glass, he looked different than he had in the back of the car. Younger, maybe, or just more visible. There was a sharpness to him that wasn't aggressive, it was focused, like a man who had decided long ago exactly what he was about and had never wasted energy on anything else. He sat down across from her, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and looked at her directly. "Michael Hayes," he said. "How much does he have on your brothers?" $1 million. Their company borrowed it 18 months ago. They couldn't pay it back, so they... She stopped. "So they offered you to him instead?" She held his gaze. "Yes." Antonio nodded slowly. "And you didn't know until it was too late to do anything about it through normal channels. I found the paperwork 3 weeks ago. I tried a lawyer. They dropped the case after one phone call." She watched his face. Michael has tons of connections. Something moved in his jaw. Hayes has been quietly buying distressed debt across Boston's small business community for 4 years. When companies can't pay, he doesn't take the assets. He takes leverage, people, favours, votes on city contracts. He paused. The room was quiet for a moment. Antonio didn't confirm or deny it. "I want to propose something to you, Olivia. You can say no. I won't stop you leaving either way." She waited. "A fake engagement. You and me. Publicly announced. Socially convincing. Legally meaningless." He said it the way he said everything. Straightforward. No performance. It does 3 things. It removes Hayes's claim on you immediately. No court in this city will touch a woman engaged to a Valenti. It humiliates your brothers publicly, which collapses whatever social standing they've been building on your back. And it gives me a direct line into Hayes's business dealings through the scrutiny that will follow. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. What do you get out of it? Hayes owes me something considerably more than money, Antonio said, and he's been difficult to reach through conventional means. Being publicly connected to the woman he tried to buy will make him careless. Angry men make mistakes. So I'm bait. No. His voice was firm on that. You're protected. There's a difference. Bait gets thrown to the sharks. What I'm describing puts you behind the strongest wall in Boston, while Hayes drowns himself, trying to get to you. Olivia looked down at her hands. 3 weeks ago, she'd been 3 months from launching a software prototype she'd been building alone at night after her brothers went to sleep. 3 weeks ago, she'd still believed she might find a way out that didn't require blowing everything up. How long? She asked. As long as it takes to dismantle him properly. 3 months minimum, possibly 6. And my brothers. Your brothers lose their leverage over you permanently, not temporarily, permanently. Olivia was quiet for a moment. I have a project, she said. A software build. I've been working on it for 2 years. I need resources I don't have and time my brothers have never given me. Antonio's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. The same shift she'd seen in the car when he'd looked at her fingers. Tell me about it, he said. She almost deflected. That was her instinct, the one her brothers had spent years installing in her. Don't take up too much space. Don't sound too smart. Don't make people uncomfortable with how much you know. For a second, the old habit rose up in her throat like a reflex. She swallowed it back down and told him about her program. Antonio was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man being polite, the quiet of a man actually thinking. Something shifted between them, small but real. 2 people recognizing each other across a very unexpected distance, and that, not the protection, not the revenge, not the penthouse or the marble floors or the Boston skyline behind his head, was what made her decide. Not what he offered her, what he asked. Chapter 3. The engagement announcement went out. By the next morning, Olivia's phone had missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize and 2 from numbers she did. Liam. Noah. She didn't answer either. Antonio had a team. That was the first thing she learned about how he operated. Not assistants, not employees in the conventional sense. A quiet network of people who were very good at very specific things and never needed to be asked twice. His publicist had placed the engagement story in 3 separate outlets. By that week, it had been picked up by every social column in Boston. Olivia Fisher, previously unknown, engaged to Antonio Valenti. The photo they used was from a charity event Antonio had attended 2 weeks prior. She wasn't in it. The publicist had cropped it strategically so the empty space beside him implied a presence, rather than confirming one. Antonio had looked at the final version, said, "Fine," and gone back to whatever he was reading. Olivia had studied that photo for a long time. She was sitting in the office he'd given her on the 2nd floor of the penthouse. It was smaller than his own study, but it had better light, east-facing windows. That caught the morning sun full on, and she suspected that hadn't been accidental. A new laptop, server access credentials, and a note in his handwriting that said simply, "Whatever you need, ask Marcus downstairs." She hadn't asked for any of it. He'd just set it up. She opened the laptop and started working. 3 days into their arrangement, Antonio knocked on the open office door at 7 in the evening. She hadn't noticed it getting dark. That happened sometimes when she was deep in a build. The world just fell away and there was only the problem in front of her and the solution she was moving toward. "You haven't had dinner," he said. She looked up, then at the window. The Boston skyline was fully lit against a dark sky. "I'll get something later." He stepped into the room properly and looked at the screen. Not the polite look of a man pretending to understand something, the focused look of someone actually reading it. He leaned forward slightly, one hand resting on the desk beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her shoulder. "Is that a prediction model?" "Yes. I've been building it for 2 years." She kept her eyes on the screen. "Easier that way. I had a full scholarship to MIT, computer science. I was 2 years in." She paused, then said it simply, like a fact she'd stopped apologizing for. "Liam called me home in my 2nd year, said the family needed me. I never went back." Antonio said nothing for a moment. He was still leaning over her shoulder, still looking at the screen. For a second, the room was just that, the two of them, the quiet, the distance between them that was not quite enough distance. Antonio straightened up first, slowly, like a man making a deliberate decision. "Does it work?" he asked. His voice was even, almost. Olivia turned back to the screen. Her heart was doing something she chose to ignore. "It's hitting 83% accuracy. Most platforms don't get past 60. She kept her voice steady. "I just need infrastructure to scale it." Antonio was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her the way nobody in her life ever had. Not at the problem on the screen, not at what the platform could earn, but at her, the person who had built it, alone, in the dark, while her brothers slept. "I want to bring someone in to look at this," he said. "An infrastructure specialist I trust. If your model is what I think it is, I'll fund the whole build." Olivia turned in her chair to face him fully. "Just like that. You have barely seen it. I've seen enough." He said it simply. No flattery, no performance. Just a man stating what he believed to be true. "You built this alone with no resources and no support while being used as a social prop by 2 men who had no idea what they were sitting next to." He paused. "I know what this is worth, Olivia. The question is whether you'll let someone act on that." She had spent 28 years being assessed by her brothers, by their business contacts, by men like Michael Hayes who looked at her and saw an asset with a face. She knew what it felt like to be appraised. This wasn't that. Nobody had ever valued what she was capable of as its own complete thing. Not useful to anyone, not tradable, just hers, just real. It took her a moment to find her voice. "Okay," she said. "Bring him in." Antonio nodded and turned to leave. "Mr. Antonio?" He stopped. "Thank you. Not for the resources." She held his gaze. "For seeing it." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite open, not quite closed, somewhere in between, like a door that hadn't decided yet. "Come eat," he said. He was almost at the door when he stopped, didn't turn around fully, just paused, one hand on the frame, like something had caught him before he could leave. "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "MIT lost more than you did when you left." He didn't wait for her response. "Okay. Let's take a break or a second." A man who could have anything walking out the door, stopping himself and saying the one thing she needed to hear her entire life, without asking for a single thing in return. That's not just a romance, that's a reckoning. If this story is hitting you, subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell and join this family. Because what's coming next for Olivia and Antonio is the part you absolutely cannot miss. Don't go anywhere. Chapter 4. She found it by accident. 3 weeks into their arrangement, on a Tuesday evening when Antonio was at a late meeting and the penthouse was quiet, Olivia went looking for a printer cable in the supply room off the main hallway. What she found instead was a filing cabinet, unlocked, second drawer, with a folder tabbed in neat black lettering. Hayes, Fisher Construction, Timeline. She stood there for a long moment. Then she took the folder to the kitchen table and opened it. It took her 40 minutes to read through everything. When she finished, she sat back and looked at the Boston skyline through the window and thought about how a person could believe they understood their own life and be completely wrong. The part that made her dizzy was the second document, a land acquisition record from 8 years ago, a commercial property in the South End purchased by Hayes through the same shell company structure previously owned by a company called Valenti Development Group. She was still staring at it when she heard the elevator. Antonio came in, the way he always did, jacket already off, carrying it over one arm, the particular quiet of a man who'd learned early that you didn't need to announce yourself to command a room. He stopped when he saw her at the table. He looked at the folder, then at her face. He didn't say anything. "How long have you known?" Olivia said. Not a question. Antonio set his jacket on the chair and walked to the kitchen. He poured 2 glasses of water, brought them both to the table, and sat down across from her. 8 months, he said. The word landed in the room like a stone. 8 months. She kept her voice level. So, when I dove into your car, when you offered me this arrangement, you already knew who I was. I knew of your brothers. I knew Hayes had leverage over them. I didn't know about you specifically until you were in my car. He held her gaze. That part was coincidence. Everything I told you was true. But you had a file on my family. I have files on everyone connected to Hayes. That's not personal. That's how I work. Olivia looked down at the land acquisition document. The South End property, that was yours. Something moved across Antonio's face, quick and controlled and gone before she could fully read it, but she caught the edges of it. Whatever Hayes had taken from him, it wasn't just property. My father built that building, Antonio said. It was the first thing Valenti Development ever owned in Boston. Hayes acquired it through a fraudulent contract when my father was dying and we were going through a rough patch. He paused. The kitchen was very quiet. Olivia looked at him across the table, really looked at him the way she hadn't let herself since the night at the desk, since the moment at the door, since all the small moments she'd been carefully filing away somewhere she didn't examine too closely. So, this was always about the building, she said. This was always about Hayes. Antonio leaned forward. The building is what he took. What he did to my father in those last months, using a dying man's confusion to steal what he'd spent his life building. That's what I'm here for. Olivia was quiet for a moment. You should have told me. Yes. The directness of it disarmed her. No defense, no justification. Just yes. I'm not a weapon, she said. I agreed to this arrangement because it gave me something I needed. But if I'm walking into rooms with you, standing beside you, letting people believe we're... She stopped. I need to know what I'm walking into. All of it. Not the version you decide I can handle. Antonio looked at her for a long moment. You're right, he said. That was a mistake, not a calculated one. I'm not used to... He stopped himself. Started again. I work alone. I always have. Information is how I control outcomes, and I don't share it easily. He paused. The skyline sat behind him. All lit glass and steel. The city doing what cities do at night. Burning bright and indifferent to the small human reckonings happening inside its buildings. Olivia closed the folder. If we're doing this properly, she said, then we do it properly. No more half information. No more me finding things in filing cabinets. You tell me what you know, I tell you what I see, and we move together. She met his eyes. Not you protecting me from the details. Partners. Antonio was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. That door again, the one that was never quite open, never quite closed, but this time it moved, just slightly, just enough. Partners, he said. He held out his hand across the table. Olivia looked at it, then at him. Then she reached across and took it. Neither of them let go quite as quickly as they should have. Chapter 5. The Harrington Foundation Gala was the kind of event that Boston's money attended, not because they enjoyed it, but because being seen there meant something. Old ballroom, chandelier lighting, the particular hush of people who had learned to perform wealth so long they'd forgotten they were performing. Antonio had been to it lots of times. He'd never brought anyone. Olivia stood at the mirror in her room 2 hours before they were due to leave, looking at the woman looking back at her, the dress fitted through the body, draping at the shoulder. Antonio's stylist had brought options, but this was the one Olivia had picked herself, not because it was the most expensive, but because it was the one that looked like her, like who she actually was, not who anyone had ever tried to make her. Her hair was down, full and natural, the way she'd stopped wearing it around her brothers years ago because Noah had once said it looked unprofessional. She was done being professional for people who didn't deserve the effort. There was a knock at the door. "Ready?" Antonio's voice. She opened the door. He looked at her the way he'd been carefully not looking at her for 5 weeks, just for a second, unguarded before he put it away, but she caught it. She was getting good at catching the things he tried not to show. "You look." He stopped, started again. "They won't be looking at anyone else tonight. I can assure you of that." It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was a statement of fact, delivered like a warning. Olivia picked up her bag. "Good," she said. "Let them look. Our plan won't work if they don't." They arrived at 8:20. The room shifted when they walked in. Not dramatically. Boston money was too composed for drama. But she felt it. The recalibration. Antonio Valenti had brought someone. Antonio Valenti, who came alone to everything, who kept his private life so private it had become its own kind of myth, had walked in with a woman on his arm, and the woman was... She heard her name moving through the room before they'd reached the bar. Olivia Fisher, the Fisher brothers, sister. Engaged to Valenti, she kept her chin level and her hand light on Antonio's arm and smiled at the people he introduced her to like she'd been doing this her whole life. She hadn't, but she'd spent years managing her brother's social events, smoothing conversations, reading rooms. This was the same skill set, just a different room. Antonio stayed close, not possessively, he wasn't that kind of man, but deliberately, always within reach, always aware of where she was. She noticed that too. They were 40 minutes in when she saw Liam. He was across the room with Noah beside him, both of them in suits that looked newer than anything she'd seen them wear before, trying to belong somewhere that had never quite accepted them. Her chest did something complicated at the sight of them, not grief exactly, not anymore, something flatter and more final. Noah saw her first. His expression cycled through shock, anger and calculation in about 3 seconds. Antonio at her, sighed. Something moved across his face that she'd never seen there before. It looked almost like regret. Almost. Michael Hayes appeared from the left 20 minutes later. He'd been there all along, she realised, waiting. He moved through the room with the practised ease of a man who believed every space belonged to him by right. He stopped in front of them. "Antonio." His voice was smooth. "And Olivia." He looked at her the way he had outside the church, like she was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. "I have to say, this has been quite the performance." "Has it?" Antonio said. "The engagement." Hayes smiled. Convenient timing. I've been asking around. Nobody can place you two together before the wedding day. Not one person. He looked at Olivia directly. You want to tell these people what this actually is? Funny you should say that, Hayes, because Olivia here has something you would be interested in. The room was close enough to hear. That was the point. Olivia looked at Hayes for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and took out a folded document. She'd been carrying it for 3 days, waiting. You're right, she said pleasantly. Let's talk about what things actually are. She held up the document. This is a compounding interest contract, issued by Harbour Light Capital LLC, which is a shell company registered in Delaware that traces back to you. She looked at Hayes calmly. It was issued to Fisher Construction 18 months ago for $1 million with a clause on page 11 that compounds at 40% after 6 months of non-payment, which is not legal in the state of Massachusetts for private lending agreements. She paused. My brothers signed it because they didn't read page 11. You were counting on that. The room was very quiet. Hayes's smile hadn't moved, but something behind his eyes had. I also have the Valenti Development acquisition documents from 2016, Olivia continued. Same shell, company structure, different victim. And if you did it twice, I'm sure there are tons of others you have done this fraud to. We just have to look for them. She looked at him steadily. Antonio spoke. How many others are there, Michael? Because my attorneys have been asking that question for 2 weeks and the answers are getting interesting. Hayes looked at Antonio. Antonio looked back at him with the expression of a man who had been waiting 8 years for this specific moment and found it was everything he'd expected. You should go, Antonio said quietly, while it's still your choice. Hayes straightened his jacket, looked at Olivia one more time with an expression she didn't flinch from. Then he left. Olivia folded the document, put it back in her bag, and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. Antonio leaned close, his voice low at her ear. Now I see why you wanted to do the talking. She felt him smile more than she saw it. I can't lie, that felt. Good partner, she said quietly. Chapter 6. Hayes was arrested on a Thursday. Olivia found out the way most of Boston did. A brief notice in the financial section, 2 paragraphs. The kind of story that looked small on the page but meant everything to the people who understood what it represented. Harbour Light Capital LLC, securities fraud, predatory lending across 14 separate cases spanning 6 years, 14 families. She sat with that number for a long time. Antonio found her at her desk an hour later, still staring at the article on her screen. He didn't say anything. He just came and stood behind her, one hand resting warm and steady on her shoulder, and read it with her in silence. After a moment, she reached up and covered his hand with hers. They stayed like that for a long time, the city outside moving and indifferent, the two of them still. We did that, she said quietly. You did that, he said. Take the credit. She turned in her chair and looked up at him. He was looking at her the way he'd stopped trying to hide, openly, completely, like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. She was starting to get used to it. She wasn't sure that was safe. Her brothers came on a Sunday, both of them. No warning, just the intercom from downstairs, Liam's voice tight and stripped of its usual authority. Antonio let them up without asking Olivia, just looked at her across the room, and she nodded once. He stood beside her when they walked in, his arm just barely touching hers, present and solid and warm. Liam saw it immediately, saw the penthouse, the skyline, the quiet certainty of a life being built on foundations they hadn't given her. Then he looked at Antonio standing next to his sister, like she was something worth standing next to, Something crossed his face that she didn't spend time reading. Olivia, Liam said. We need help. I know, she said. Noah looked between her and Antonio. Can we talk privately? No, Olivia said simply. Whatever you say to me, you say in front of him. Noah's jaw tightened. Liam put a hand on his arm. Fisher Construction is finished, Liam said. The Hayes debt gets absorbed into the federal case, but there are other creditors. We're going to lose everything. I know that, Olivia said. We're your brothers. Is that all you are going to say? You were ready to discard me like I wasn't a person, she said. Not loudly, not with tears. Just the plain truth of it laid on the table between them. You know the rumour of the kind of person Michael was, and agreed to hand me over to clear a debt you created. You didn't ask me, you didn't warn me. You put it in writing. She looked at Liam, then Noah, then back. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. The room was very quiet. Antonio said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence beside her said everything that needed saying, that she was not alone anymore, that the days of her standing in rooms unprotected while men made decisions about her life were finished. Liam looked at his hands. Noah looked at the floor. I'm not going to help you save the company, Olivia said. It's gone, and that's the consequence. But I'll make sure you're not personally liable for the Hayes debt specifically. That's what I can do. Neither of them argued. She watched them leave. When the elevator closed, she let out a slow breath. Antonio turned to her, and without saying anything, opened his arms. She stepped into them. He held her the way she hadn't been held in longer than she could remember, not to comfort her into silence, not to manage her, just completely and without condition. Done, he said into her hair. Done, she said against his chest. She felt him press his lips to the top of her head, soft and certain. Neither of them moved for a long time. The platform launched on a Wednesday, 6 months after she'd sat on the floor of Antonio's penthouse in a torn wedding dress with bleeding feet and no plan. 6 months after she'd opened a laptop in a sunlit office and started building something she'd been dreaming about for 2 years in the dark. She was at her desk at 5 a.m. when it went live. She hadn't been able to sleep. Antonio found her there at 5:30, still in her pajamas, hair loose around her shoulders, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, staring at the screen with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. He leaned in the doorway. Well? She turned the screen toward him. 47 active users. Both pilot companies live. The first real-time prediction running clean, pulling data, processing, delivering results at 84% accuracy. Better than she'd projected. He looked at the screen for a long moment, then at her. Olivia, I know, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. She looked back at the screen and felt the full weight of it settle over her. 2 years of nights, of hiding her work, of building alone in the margins of a life her brothers had designed for her, all of it leading to this number on this screen at 5:30 in the morning. 47 people using something she built. Antonio crossed the room, took the coffee mug gently from her hands, set it on the desk, and pulled her to her feet. He held her face in both hands and looked at her like she was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever seen. You did this, he said. You. Not the resources, not the infrastructure. You built the thing that makes it work. Everything else was just scaffolding. She felt her eyes fill. She hadn't cried once through any of it. Not the wedding, not the brothers, not Hayes. But this undid her in a way none of those things had. Because this was hers, completely and only hers. He wiped her cheek with his thumb, gentle and unhurried, and she laughed softly at herself, and he smiled at that, the real smile, full and unhidden. Don't tell anyone I cried, she said. Tell anyone what? He said. The ring appeared the following Tuesday morning. She found it on her desk when she came in at 7, sitting on top of her keyboard in a small black box. She opened it. A dark ruby set in gold, simple and precise. Nothing decorative about it except that it was exactly what she would have chosen herself. She took it to Antonio's study. He was already at his desk. He looked up when she walked in and stood immediately, the way he always did when she entered a room, a habit she'd noticed weeks ago and never mentioned. She put the box on the desk between them. Antonio. I know, he said. He came around the desk and stood in front of her, close. I know what I said when this started. I know what the arrangement was. He looked at her the way that made her forget, sometimes, that there had ever been an arrangement at all. But somewhere, between that first night and watching you take Hayes apart in that ballroom, with a document you'd been carrying for 2 weeks, he stopped, collected himself. I stopped pretending this was strategy a long time ago, Olivia. I just didn't know how to tell you without it sounding like another negotiation. She looked at him. So tell me now, she said quietly, not as a negotiation. He took her hands in both of his. I love you, he said, simple and direct and completely open, no performance, no careful management. Just a man saying the truest thing he knew. I love how your mind works. I love that you were building something extraordinary in the dark while everyone around you tried to keep you small. I love that you walked into that gala and dismantled a man who'd been terrorizing this city for years and then asked for champagne. He paused. I love you. And I would like to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to fight alone again. Olivia's throat tightened. She had spent 28 years waiting for someone to see her, really see her, not the useful version of her, not the beautiful version, not the version that fit neatly into someone else's plan, just her. I love you too, she said. I think I have for a while. I just kept talking myself out of it. Why? Because it seemed too good to be real. Something in his expression broke open in the best possible way. He picked up the ring from the box and held it up. Equal partners, he said. Equal partners, she said back. He slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She looked down at it, the ruby catching the morning light, deep red and certain. Then back up at him, he was smiling, not the careful, controlled expression she'd spent weeks learning to read. A real smile, full and unhidden, the kind that changed his entire face. She reached up and touched his jaw. He turned his head and pressed his lips to her palm. The end.
Thank you for staying till the end. Please subscribe for more videos.
We tell stories about women who were counted out and came back as queens, women who were sold short and built empires, women who found love not because they were saved, but because they were finally seen. That's what we do here, every single time. So if you're not subscribed yet, do it right now, not later, now. Hit that notification bell because the next story is already coming, and it is not one you want to stumble across 3 weeks after everyone else has already lost their minds over it. Share this with someone who needs to hear a story about choosing yourself. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me which moment got you. Tell me if you've ever had someone look at you the way Antonio looked at Olivia. This community was built for women who know their worth and women who are still finding it. You belong here. Welcome to the family. We're just getting started.